The bullet that killed her husband tore through Delilah Nash's chest without ever touching her skin. And when she opened her eyes the next morning, the woman who had laughed at terrible jokes and sung while making breakfast was gone forever. Marshal Thomas Whitaker found her 3 days later in the ramshackle cabin outside White Pine, Nevada, sitting in a chair beside the cold body of her husband, James. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was waiting for Sunday service to begin. The July heat of 1878 had already started its cruel work, and Thomas had to fight his stomach when he stepped through the door. But what unsettled him more than the scene itself was the woman. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply sat there, her green eyes fixed on nothing at all, empty as abandoned mineshafts. "Madam," Thomas said gently, removing his hat. "Madam, I am real sorry, but we need to get you out of here." Delilah did not respond. Her chest rose and fell with breath, proving she lived, but everything else about her suggested otherwise. Thomas had seen grief before, had watched it twist people into shapes they never recovered from, but this was different. This was absence. This was a soul that had simply stopped inhabiting the body that contained it. He learned the story from the neighbors, sparse as they were in this corner of Nevada. James Nash had been a good man, a carpenter trying to build a life with his young wife in a land that seemed determined to break everyone who touched it. 3 nights ago, 2 drifters had kicked in their door looking for money, food, anything of value. James had fought them. James had lost. They had shot him twice in the chest and left him bleeding on the floor while Delilah screamed. By the time help arrived, the drifters were long gone, and James was cold. Thomas arranged for the burial. He stood in the small cemetery on the edge of White Pine, while the preacher said words that meant nothing to anyone, least of all Delilah, who stared at the pine box with those empty eyes and did not shed a single tear. The other women in town whispered that it was not natural that a wife should weep for her husband, but Thomas understood something they did not. Delilah Nash was not refusing to grieve. She had simply gone somewhere beyond grief, somewhere no tears could reach. After the funeral, Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, offered to take Delilah in. "She cannot stay alone," Mrs. Henderson said, her round face creased with concern. "Not like this." Thomas helped walk Delilah to the boarding house, one hand gently on her elbow. She moved when guided, ate when food was placed before her, but did nothing of her own accord. She was 23 years old and she had become a ghost. For 2 weeks, she remained in that state. Thomas checked on her daily, though he could not say exactly why. He was the marshal, and his duty to her had ended with the burial and the futile search for the killers. But something pulled him back to that boarding house room, to those empty eyes that had once held life. Thomas Whitaker was 31 years old, tall and lean from years in the saddle, with dark hair that fell too long over his collar and gray eyes that had seen more violence than he cared to remember. He had been a soldier once, had fought in wars that left him hollow, and then he had drifted west like so many other men looking for something they could not name. He found the marshal's badge in White Pine 5 years ago and discovered that keeping the peace in a small Nevada town suited him better than the chaos of the life before. He was good at his work, fair but firm, and the people trusted him. But he had never married, never even come close. The women in White Pine were few, and those who were available had never stirred anything in him beyond polite interest. He had convinced himself he was content alone, that companionship was for other men, men who had not seen what he had seen. Then Delilah Nash arrived in town 6 months ago as a new bride, and Thomas had felt something shift in his chest when he first saw her laughing in the general store, her honey-colored hair catching the light, her green eyes bright with joy. He had pushed the feeling down immediately, recognizing it for the dangerous thing it was. She was married, happy, building a life. He had no place in it. Now that life was ashes, and the woman who had laughed was gone, and Thomas could not shake the feeling that he was supposed to do something, supposed to help somehow. Though he had no idea what help looked like, on the 15th day, he sat in a chair across from Delilah in Mrs. Henderson's parlor. She was staring out the window at the dusty street, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. He had brought wildflowers, a clumsy gesture that felt foolish the moment he set them on the table beside her. She did not look at them. "Mrs. Nash," he said quietly. "Delilah, I know you are hurting. I know the world feels like it has ended, but you are still here, you are still breathing, and I need you to know that you do not have to face this alone." She did not respond. She did not even blink. Thomas leaned forward, his hat in his hands. "I lost people too. In the war, friends who were like brothers. I watched them die, and I thought I would die right along with them. For a while I wanted to. But I kept going, kept breathing, kept putting one foot in front of the other. And eventually the weight got lighter. Not gone, but lighter. That can happen for you too." Still nothing. But he thought maybe her fingers twitched slightly. It might have been his imagination. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I will be back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. However long it takes for you to come back, I will wait. Because I see you in there, Delilah. I see you, and I know you are still fighting, even if you do not realize it yet." He left the flowers and walked out into the blazing Nevada heat. True to his word, Thomas returned the next day and the day after and the day after that. He brought small things, flowers, a book of poetry, a smooth stone he found by the creek. He talked to her about the town, about the weather, about nothing and everything. She never responded, never acknowledged his presence, but he kept coming. Mrs. Henderson pulled him aside one evening. "Marshal, you are a kind man, but I am not sure this is doing any good. The doctor says she is healthy in body, but her mind has gone somewhere else. She may never come back." "She will," Thomas said with a certainty he did not entirely feel. "She just needs time and someone who will not give up on her." "Why?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas looked at the closed door of Delilah's room. "Because someone should. Because she deserves to know that the world is not only darkness and violence. Because—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought, unsure if he even understood it himself. The older woman studied him with knowing eyes. "Be careful, Marshal. The heart is a dangerous thing when it decides to care." He nodded, but he did not stop coming. Summer faded into early autumn, and still Delilah remained locked in her silent prison. Thomas continued his visits, now nearly 2 months since James Nash's death. He had started reading to her, sitting in the chair by the window and working through a collection of stories he had borrowed from the schoolteacher. He did not know if she heard him, but it felt better than sitting in silence. One October afternoon, as he was reading a particularly dramatic passage about a ship at sea, he heard something that made him stop mid-sentence. It was so soft he almost missed it, but it was unmistakable. A sound. A small, broken sound from Delilah's throat. He looked up. She was staring at him now, really staring, her green eyes focused for the first time in months. They were still empty, still hollow, but they were seeing. Tears had begun to slide down her cheeks, silent and slow. Thomas set the book down and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Delilah." "He is gone," she whispered, her voice ragged from disuse. "James is gone." "I know," Thomas said softly. "I am so sorry." The tears came faster now, and her breath hitched. "I could not save him. I tried to stop the bleeding, but there was so much blood, and he kept telling me it would be all right, but it was not all right. It was not. It was not your fault," Thomas said firmly. "None of it was your fault. She shook her head, her whole body beginning to tremble. I should have died with him. I should have. Why am I still here? Because you are meant to be here, Thomas said, reaching out slowly to take her hand. She did not pull away. Because your story is not finished yet. Delilah looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. I do not know how to keep going. You do not have to know, you just have to keep breathing, one day at a time, and I will help you. I promise. She cried then, really cried, great racking sobs that shook her thin frame. Thomas pulled her into his arms, letting her collapse against his chest, and he held her while she released months of grief that had been locked inside. Mrs. Henderson heard the commotion and came running, but Thomas waved her away. This was what Delilah needed, not silence, not emptiness, but the release of everything she had been holding. When the tears finally subsided, Delilah pulled back, exhausted. I do not even know you, she said hoarsely. Why have you been coming here? Because someone needed to, Thomas said simply. And because I wanted to. She studied his face, confusion and something else mixing in her expression. Mrs. Henderson told me. She said you have been here every day. Why would you do that for a stranger? You are not a stranger, Thomas said. Not anymore. Over the following weeks, Delilah slowly began to rejoin the world. She started eating properly, regaining some of the weight she had lost. She spoke more, though her words were often quiet and measured, as if she were testing each one before letting it out. Thomas continued his visits, now met with conversation rather than silence. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the town gossip, the price of flour at the general store. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Delilah told him about her life before White Pine, about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. She had married James when she was 20, full of hope and dreams of a future. They had come west looking for opportunity, believing they could build something together. For 2 years, they had been happy. Thomas told her about his own past, about the farm in Illinois where he grew up, about joining the army at 19 and fighting in campaigns he still had nightmares about. He told her about the friends he had lost, about the years of drifting afterward, and about finding something like peace in White Pine. You still have nightmares? She asked one day. Sometimes, he admitted. Less than I used to. The memories fade, or maybe you just learn to carry them better. Delilah nodded. I dream about that night, about James, about the men who killed him. I wake up and forget just for a second that he is gone, and then I remember and it feels like losing him all over again. That will get easier too, Thomas said. Not fast, but it will. She looked at him with those green eyes, still sad but no longer empty. You really believe that? I do. As autumn deepened and the Nevada landscape turned gold and brown, something shifted between them. The visits that had started as duty, as compassion, became something Thomas looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. He found himself thinking about Delilah at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, what she was thinking. He started taking more care with his appearance before visiting, making sure his shirt was clean, his hair combed. He knew it was dangerous. She was grieving, vulnerable, and he had no right to feel what he was beginning to feel. But the heart, as Mrs. Henderson had warned, did not follow rules or logic. Delilah, for her part, found herself waiting for Thomas's visits with something approaching eagerness. In a world that had become gray and flat, he was color. He was warmth. He had sat with her in her darkness and waited, patient and steady, until she could find her way back. She did not know what to call the feeling that bloomed in her chest when she heard his footsteps on the stairs, but she knew it was something she had not expected to feel again. One November afternoon, Thomas arrived to find Delilah standing in the boarding house parlor, wearing a new dress and a shawl, her hair pinned up neatly. Would you walk with me? she asked. "I have been inside for so long. I would like to see the town." Thomas smiled, offering his arm. "It would be my honor." They walked slowly through White Pine, past the general store and the saloon, past the church where James was buried in the cemetery beyond. Delilah paused at the iron gate, looking at the rows of markers. "I have not been back since the funeral," she said quietly. "Do you want to go in?" Thomas asked. She shook her head. "Not today, but soon, maybe." They continued walking, ending up at the edge of town where the land opened up into vast stretches of sagebrush and mountains in the distance. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of winter. "It is beautiful here," Delilah said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the breeze. "I had forgotten that. For a while everything looked ugly to me." "What changed?" Thomas asked. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart beat faster. "You," she said simply. "You showed me that there was still kindness in the world, that there were still people worth knowing. You gave me a reason to keep trying." Thomas swallowed hard. "Delilah, I know it is too soon," she interrupted. "I know I should not be feeling anything except grief. But I need you to know that your visits, your patience, everything you have done, it has meant more to me than I can say. You brought me back from a place I did not think I could return from." "You brought yourself back," Thomas said. "I just kept you company along the way." She smiled, a real smile, the first he had seen since that day in the general store months ago. "Then thank you for the company, Marshal Whitaker." "Thomas," he said. "Please call me Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you, Thomas." Winter came to Nevada. Not the brutal cold of the northern territories, but a sharp, clear cold that frosted the windows and made breath visible in the morning air. Delilah moved out of the boarding house and into a small cottage on the edge of town that the church owned and rented cheaply to those in need. She found work helping Mrs. Henderson with the cooking and cleaning at the boarding house, grateful for the activity, for the sense of purpose. Thomas helped her move her few belongings, which mostly consisted of clothes and a trunk of items from her marriage to James. She hesitated over the trunk, her hand on the lid. "Should I keep these?" she asked Thomas. "His things? Or is it wrong to hold on?" "There is no right or wrong," Thomas said. "Keep what gives you comfort. Let go of what causes pain. You will know the difference." She kept the trunk but put it in the back of the closet, a piece of her past that she honored but did not dwell on. The town had started to talk, of course. In a place as small as White Pine, the Marshals' frequent visits to the widow Nash did not go unnoticed. Some of the gossip was kind, noting that Thomas was a good man helping a woman in need. Some was less generous, suggesting impropriety and scandal. Thomas did not care, and when Delilah asked him about it one evening, he told her as much. "Let them talk," he said. "I know my intentions are honorable, and so do you. That is all that matters." "Are they?" Delilah asked. "Honorable, I mean." He looked at her across the small table in her cottage where they had been sharing dinner, a new routine that had developed naturally. "What are you asking?" She met his gaze steadily. "I am asking if you are only here because you feel sorry for me, if this is charity." "Because if it is, I need to know." Thomas set down his fork. "It started that way, maybe. I saw someone in pain and I wanted to help. But Delilah, it has not been that for a long time. I come here because I want to be here. Because when I am with you, I feel something I have not felt in years. Maybe ever." "What do you feel?" she asked softly. "Like I have come home," he said. "Like all the wandering I have done, all the searching, it was leading me here, to you." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had cried before. These were not tears of grief, but of something tentative and new. "I feel it too," she admitted. "And it terrifies me. James has been gone only 5 months. People will say I did not love him if I move forward so quickly. They will say I am betraying his memory. Did you love him? Thomas asked. Yes, she said immediately, with my whole heart. Then you did not betray anything. Love does not work that way. The love you had for James, that is yours forever. It does not disappear just because he is gone. But that does not mean you cannot love again. It does not mean you have to be alone for the rest of your life to prove your loyalty to a dead man. Is that what you want? Delilah asked, her voice trembling. For me to love you. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. I want you to be happy. If that happiness includes me, then yes, I would like that very much. But only when you are ready. Only when it feels right to you. I told you I would wait, and I meant it. However long it takes for life to return to your eyes, I will wait. She squeezed his hand, a tear sliding down her cheek. You have already waited, and life has returned, Thomas, because of you. He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, the same way he had done that day in the boarding house when she first spoke again. Then may I court you properly? May I take you to dinner, walk with you, spend time with you without hiding what I hope might grow between us? Yes, Delilah said, smiling through her tears. Yes, you may. The courtship of Thomas Whitaker and Delilah Nash became the most talked-about event in White Pine that winter. Some people disapproved, citing propriety and the short time since James's death. But most saw what was plain to anyone who looked. Two people who had been broken by life finding healing in each other. Thomas courted her with the patience he had shown from the beginning, but now with an openness that made his intentions clear. He took her to the church social, where they danced to fiddle music and laughed like young people courting for the first time. He brought her small gifts, not flowers now but practical things. A warm scarf for the cold, a book she had mentioned wanting to read, a tin of tea from the general store. Delilah bloomed under his attention. The woman who had been a hollow shell found herself becoming whole again, piece by piece. She cooked dinners for Thomas in her cottage, experimenting with recipes and laughing when they did not turn out right. She sat with him on her small porch on clear evenings, wrapped in blankets against the cold, talking about their dreams for the future. I want children someday, Delilah said one night, surprising herself with the admission. I always did, even before. James and I had talked about it, and when he died, I thought that dream died too, but now I find myself thinking about it again. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I would like that too, a family. I always thought it was not in the cards for me, that I was too set in my ways, too damaged from the war, but with you I can see it. A home, children, a life that is about more than just surviving. You think we can have that? Delilah asked. After everything? I think we can have anything we are willing to work for, Thomas said. And I am willing to work for this, for us. Christmas came, and Thomas gave Delilah a simple gold band on a delicate chain. It is not an engagement ring, he clarified quickly. I know it is too soon for that. But I wanted you to have something from me, something that shows my commitment to you, even if we are not ready to make it official yet. Delilah held the chain up to the lamplight, watching the ring catch and reflect the glow. It is beautiful. I will wear it always. She put it on immediately, tucking it beneath her dress where it rested against her heart. That night, as Thomas walked her home from the church Christmas service, she stopped him in the street, looking up at his face in the moonlight. I love you, she said. I know I should wait longer to say it. I know people will judge, but I do not care. I love you, Thomas Whitaker, and I need you to know. Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek. I love you too. I have loved you for longer than I should probably admit, and I do not give a damn what anyone thinks. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Delilah felt the final pieces of her broken heart click back into place. She was not the same woman she had been before James died. That woman was gone forever. But this new woman, forged in grief and healed by patience and love. She was someone Delilah could be proud to be. When spring came to Nevada in 1879, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes, Thomas proposed properly. He took Delilah back to the place at the edge of town where they had walked that November day, and he knelt in the sagebrush with a simple ring he had purchased from a jeweler in the next town over. "Delilah Nash, you have brought light back into my life. You have given me a reason to believe in good things again. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me?" Delilah pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in May, a small ceremony in the White Pine Church with Mrs. Henderson and a few close friends in attendance. Delilah wore a simple cream dress, and Thomas wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was not a dry eye in the building. Some people still whispered that it was too soon, that Delilah should have waited a full year at least. But Delilah did not care. She had spent enough time in darkness. She was done waiting for life. Life was here now, in the form of a good man who had shown her that love could exist even after loss. They moved into a larger house on the outskirts of White Pine, a 2-story home with enough room for the family they hoped to build. Thomas continued his work as marshal, and Delilah continued helping Mrs. Henderson, though she cut back her hours to focus on making their house a home. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment. There were moments when grief would hit Delilah unexpectedly, when she would remember James and feel a pang of guilt for being happy. Thomas never resented these moments. He held her when she cried, listened when she needed to talk about her first husband, and gave her the space to honor the past while building the future. "Loving me does not mean forgetting him," Thomas told her one night when she apologized for crying over a memory. "You are allowed to carry him with you. He was part of your story. I am not jealous of a memory, Delilah. I am just grateful I get to be part of the rest of your story." Delilah loved him even more for understanding. By their first anniversary, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, and then he set it down and pulled her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," she said. "We are going to have a baby, Thomas." He kissed her long and deep, and when he pulled back she saw tears in his gray eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and Thomas hovered anxiously, trying to help in ways that were sometimes more hindrance than help. But as her belly grew and the sickness faded, excitement took its place. They spent evenings planning the nursery, debating names, imagining what their child would be like. Thomas built a cradle with his own hands, working carefully to make it perfect. Delilah sewed tiny clothes, her heart full as she stitched. In January of 1880, on a cold, clear night, Delilah went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Thomas feared he would lose her, that fate would be cruel enough to take away another person he loved. But Delilah was strong, stronger than anyone knew, and as dawn broke over White Pine, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Matthew James Whitaker, honoring the past while celebrating the future. Thomas held his son for the first time with hands that shook, overwhelmed by the tiny life that depended on him. Matthew had his mother's green eyes and a shock of dark hair like his father. "He is perfect," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "He is absolutely perfect." Delilah, exhausted but glowing, smiled at her husband holding their son. "We made this," she said softly. "We made something beautiful out of all that pain." "You did," Thomas corrected. "You are the miracle here, Delilah, you and this boy." The early days of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful. Thomas took to fatherhood with surprising ease, waking for middle-of-the-night feedings, pacing the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Delilah watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. As Matthew grew, the house filled with noise and laughter. The boy was curious and energetic, crawling into everything, pulling himself up on furniture, babbling nonsense that Thomas swore was words. Delilah had never imagined being this happy, this content. The darkness of those months after James's death felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. On a Sunday afternoon in the summer of 1881, Thomas took Delilah and 2-year-old Matthew on a picnic to the place where he had proposed. They spread a blanket under the wide Nevada sky and ate sandwiches while Matthew toddled around, collecting rocks and laughing at nothing. "Do you remember when we stood here?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the spot. "When you told me I had shown you the world was not all darkness," Delilah smiled. "I remember. I also remember thinking I would never feel whole again, that the best I could hope for was to learn to live with the emptiness." And now, she looked at him, at their son, at the life they had built together. "Now I am more whole than I have ever been. You did not just help me heal, Thomas. You helped me become someone new, someone better." Thomas took her hand. "We helped each other. I was just as lost before you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to want more from life than just getting through the days." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Matthew chase a butterfly through the sagebrush. After a while, Thomas spoke again. "I want more," he said. "More children, more years, more everything with you. I want to fill our house with kids and grow old watching them grow up. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, Delilah, however long that is." "However long," Delilah echoed, squeezing his hand. "I like the sound of that." 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Dorothy May Whitaker. She was a serious baby, watching the world with wide blue eyes that eventually turned hazel, and she had Thomas wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Matthew was initially skeptical of the new arrival who took up so much of his parents' attention, but he quickly became a devoted big brother, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bath time. The house was chaotic now, full of children and noise and the beautiful mess of a growing family. Thomas had been promoted to sheriff of the county, a position that came with more responsibility but also more stability. Delilah had stopped working for Mrs. Henderson entirely, focusing all her energy on their home and children. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough. Enough food, enough warmth, enough love to fill every corner of their lives. On difficult days, when the children were cranky or money was tight or the demands of life felt overwhelming, Thomas and Delilah would look at each other and remember. They would remember where they had started, how broken they had both been, and they would feel grateful for every moment, even the hard ones. In 1885, their third child arrived, another boy they named Marcus Dean Whitaker. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and easy to please, and he completed their family in a way that felt right. Matthew was now 5 and already talking about being a marshal like his father. Dorothy was 2 and had begun showing signs of her mother's determination and stubbornness. The house on the outskirts of White Pine was full to bursting with life and love. Thomas had built an addition, giving them more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Delilah had planted a garden that thrived in the Nevada soil, providing vegetables and herbs for their table. They had chickens and a milk cow, and a dog that Matthew had found as a stray and begged to keep. It was everything Delilah had dreamed of in those dark days when dreams seemed impossible. It was everything Thomas had wanted without knowing he wanted it. One evening, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Thomas and Delilah sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. They did this often, this moment of peace at the end of busy days, a chance to reconnect and simply be together. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Delilah asked. "When you found me in the cabin." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, I think about how close we came to losing you, not physically but mentally. You were so far away." "I was," Delilah agreed. "I did not want to be here anymore. The only reason I kept breathing was because my body did not know how to stop." "What brought you back?" Thomas asked. "Really? I know I was there, but what made you decide to fight?" Delilah considered the question. "I think it was knowing someone cared. You were a stranger, but you kept showing up. You did not give up. And eventually, I started to feel guilty for giving up when you were trying so hard. Then the guilt turned into curiosity about why you were doing it. And the curiosity turned into wanting to know you. And wanting to know you turned into wanting to live again." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "You saved my life, Thomas. I need you to know that. You saved me." "You saved yourself," Thomas said. "I just provided a reason." "Then I am glad you were the reason," Delilah said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad for all of it, even the pain, because it led me here to you, to our children, to this life. I would not trade this for anything." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I. Not for anything in the world." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Matthew grew into a serious young man who did indeed follow his father into law enforcement, becoming a deputy by the time he was 20. Dorothy surprised everyone by developing a talent for teaching and opened a small school in White Pine when she was just 18. Marcus became a carpenter, using his hands to build things the way his namesake James Nash once had. Thomas and Delilah watched their children grow with pride and wonder. They became grandparents when Matthew married a sweet girl named Sarah and had children of their own. Dorothy eventually married as well, to a rancher from the next county, and gave Thomas and Delilah more grandchildren to spoil. Through it all, their love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, growing roots that reached down into the foundations of their lives and held fast. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about money or discipline, or the 100 small things married couples disagree about. But they never went to bed angry, never let resentment fester, and always remembered how precious their time together was. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Thomas took Delilah back to that place at the edge of town one more time. They were both older now, gray threading through their hair, lines etched on their faces from years of laughter and worry and life lived fully. But when Thomas looked at Delilah, he still saw the woman he had fallen in love with. When Delilah looked at Thomas, she still saw the man who had waited for her to come back from darkness. 20 years, Thomas said, shaking his head in wonder. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Delilah said, echoing words he had once spoken to her. "Just like you told me. One day at a time." Thomas pulled her close. "I would do it all again, every moment, every struggle, just to end up here with you." "Even the hard parts?" Delilah asked. "Even the beginning, especially the beginning," Thomas said, "because the beginning taught me what really matters. It taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone worth fighting for, worth waiting for." Delilah kissed him, soft and slow, the kiss of people who had loved each other through decades and knew they would love each other through whatever years remained. "I am so glad you waited," she whispered. "I am so glad you did not give up." "I told you I would wait however long," Thomas reminded her. "I meant it. I would have waited forever if that is what it took." "You did not have to wait forever," Delilah said. "Just long enough. Just long enough for life to return." They stood there together as the sun set, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built something beautiful from the ruins. The Wild West was changing around them, becoming more civilized, less dangerous. White Pine was growing, adding new buildings and new residents. The world was moving forward into a new century, but Thomas and Delilah Whitaker had already found their future. It was not in the changing world around them, but in the unchanging love between them. It was in the family they had created, the life they had built, the promises they had kept. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the Nevada sky, they walked home hand in hand, the same way they had walked 1,000 times before. The house was full when they arrived. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the anniversary celebration Delilah had not known they were planning. There was food and laughter and music, and Thomas pulled Delilah into the center of the room to dance, the way they had danced at that church social so many years ago. She fit into his arms perfectly, like she had been made to be there, and they moved together with the ease of long practice. "Happy anniversary, my love," Thomas murmured into her ear. "Happy anniversary," Delilah replied, her eyes shining. "Thank you for waiting for me." "Always," Thomas said. "However long it took, however long it takes, always." The party continued late into the night, full of joy and celebration. And when everyone had finally gone home and Thomas and Delilah were alone in their bedroom, they held each other close and gave thanks for the unlikely, impossible, beautiful love they had found. Delilah thought back to that woman sitting in the cabin beside her dead husband, empty and broken, and convinced her life was over. She thought about Thomas kneeling beside her chair in the boarding house, promising to wait however long it took. She thought about all the days and months and years between then and now, the slow rebuilding of a shattered soul, the patient nurturing of new love, the creation of a family and a life worth living. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, sensing her reflective mood. "I am thinking about empty eyes," Delilah said softly, "and how you filled them with light again, how you gave me back my life when I thought it was gone forever." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "Your eyes were never truly empty. The light was always there, just hidden for a while. I just helped you find it again." "We found it together," Delilah corrected. "Everything we have, we found together." She was right, Thomas thought. They had found it together. In the wild lands of Nevada, in a small town called White Pine, a marshal and a widow had found each other and discovered that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. That patience could heal the deepest wounds. That waiting was not a burden but a gift when the person you were waiting for was worth it. Years later, when Thomas was in his 70s and Delilah in her 60s, they would tell their story to their grandchildren who gathered around asking how Grandma and Grandpa met. Delilah would talk about the darkest time in her life, about feeling like she would never be whole again. Thomas would talk about seeing a woman who needed help and deciding to stay until she found her way back. "But why did you wait so long?" one of the grandchildren asked Thomas. "Why did you not just give up?" Thomas looked at Delilah, still beautiful to him even with silver hair and aged features. "Because I knew she was in there somewhere. I could feel it. And I knew that if I waited long enough, if I was patient enough, she would come back. And she did." "And what about you, Grandma?" the child asked Delilah. "Why did you come back?" Delilah smiled, taking Thomas's hand. "Because he gave me a reason to. Because he showed me that there was still good in the world, still kindness, still love worth living for. And because I realized that staying in darkness was not honoring the husband I lost. It was wasting the life I still had." "Do you still think about your first husband?" another grandchild asked innocently. Sometimes, Delilah said honestly. He was a good man and I loved him. But loving him does not mean I cannot love your grandfather. The heart is big enough for both. Life is long enough for second chances. Thomas squeezed her hand, grateful as always for her honesty, for her willingness to honor all parts of her story, even the painful ones. As they grew older, Thomas and Delilah remained each other's constant companions. They sat on their porch every evening, watching the world change around them while their love remained steady and sure. They took care of each other through illnesses and injuries, the minor crises of aging bodies. They visited their children and grandchildren, delighting in the growing family tree they had planted together. When Thomas was 76, he developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor said his lungs were failing, probably from years of breathing dust on the frontier. He had maybe a year, maybe less. Thomas took the news calmly, more worried about Delilah than himself. "Do not even think about leaving me behind," Delilah said when he told her, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "We have come too far for that." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, hands that were gnarled with arthritis but still gentle. "I am not leaving you. I am just going ahead a bit. You will catch up eventually." "Thomas," she said, her voice breaking. "Hey," he said softly. "Remember what I told you all those years ago. About how memories do not disappear just because someone is gone. That applies to us too. When I am gone, I will still be with you. In this house we built, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunset you watch from this porch. You will not be alone, Delilah. You will never be alone." She cried against his chest, and he held her, just like he had held her that first time in the boarding house when she finally broke down. They had come full circle, he thought. Started with him comforting her through loss, and now she would have to face loss again. But this time, she was stronger. This time, she had a lifetime of love to sustain her. Thomas lived another 14 months, defying the doctor's prediction. He spent that time surrounded by family, saying his goodbyes, making sure everyone knew how much he loved them. He spent most of his time with Delilah, holding her hand, talking about their life, making sure she knew she would be all right. On a spring morning in 1905, Thomas Whitaker died peacefully in his sleep, Delilah beside him. He was 77 years old and he had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose. Delilah grieved, but she did not break. She cried, but she did not disappear into emptiness the way she had after James. This grief was different. It was deep and painful, but it was not the same hollow destruction. She had loved Thomas for 26 years. She had built a life with him, raised children with him, grown old with him. His loss was enormous, but it did not erase everything she was. At the funeral, Matthew asked his mother how she was holding up. Delilah looked at her son, this man Thomas had raised and loved as his own, and she smiled through her tears. "I am sad," she said honestly, "but I am also grateful. I got 26 years with your father. 26 years I never thought I would have. That is a gift, Matthew, a precious, beautiful gift, and I will not dishonor it by falling apart." She lived another 11 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about Thomas, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who never got to know him. She sat on the porch every evening, feeling his presence beside her, remembering their conversations and their love. On a quiet autumn evening in 1916, Delilah Nash Whitaker died at the age of 79. Her family gathered around her bed, holding her hands, telling her how much she was loved. With her last breaths, she smiled. "I see him," she whispered. "He waited for me. He is still waiting." And then she was gone, reunited with the man who had saved her life by teaching her how to live again. They buried her beside Thomas in the White Pine Cemetery. next to the graves of James Nash and so many others who had lived and loved and died in the Wild West. On her headstone, her children had engraved words she had once said to Thomas, "You gave me back my life." The story of Thomas and Delilah became legend in White Pine, passed down through generations as an example of true love, of patience, of the power of not giving up on people even when they have given up on themselves. Parents told it to their children to teach them about compassion. Married couples told it to each other to remember what mattered. In the decades and centuries that followed, the Wild West faded into history. White Pine changed and grew, modern conveniences replacing the rough frontier life. The house Thomas and Delilah built still stood for many years, home to different families who never knew the love story that had unfolded within its walls. But the essence of what they had created together never truly disappeared. It lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set. It lived on in the idea that love could conquer even the darkest grief, that patience could heal the deepest wounds, that waiting for someone to find their way back from darkness was always worth it. Thomas had seen a woman with empty eyes and had said, without words but through actions, "I will wait however long for life to return." And he had waited, and life had returned. And together, they had built something extraordinary from the ashes of tragedy. That was their legacy. Not wealth or fame or achievement, but love. Pure, patient, transformative love that had turned two broken people into one unbreakable partnership. That had created a family and a future where once there had been only despair. That had proved beyond doubt that even in the harsh and violent Wild West, there was room for tenderness, for healing, for happily ever after. Their story ended the way all stories must, with death and the passage of time. But it also never ended, because the love they shared and the life they built continued to ripple outward through their children and their children's children, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring hearts they would never know. In the dusty archives of White Pine, a photograph still exists of Thomas and Delilah on their 20th anniversary, standing together with the Nevada landscape behind them. He is tall and steady, his arm around her waist. She is smiling, her eyes full of light and life and love. They are looking at each other instead of the camera, captured in a moment of pure connection. If you look closely at that photograph, if you study their faces and their body language, you can see the entire story written there. You can see the darkness they survived, the patience that healed them, the love that sustained them. You can see a marshal who refused to give up on a widow. You can see a woman who learned to live again. You can see the power of waiting, of caring, of choosing love even when love seems impossible. That photograph is the evidence, the proof, that their story really happened. That in 1878, in a small Nevada town, a woman with empty eyes met a man who promised to wait, and together they created something beautiful, something lasting, something that mattered. And in the end, is that not what every great love story is about? Two people finding each other against impossible odds and deciding that the other person is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth everything. Thomas waited for Delilah to return from darkness. Delilah waited for Thomas to come home every night. They waited through difficulties and struggles and all the normal challenges of life. And their waiting was rewarded with decades of happiness, with a family that flourished, with a love that never dimmed. When the story of Thomas and Delilah is told now, people often focus on the dramatic beginning, on the tragedy and the rescue. But those who really understand know that the true beauty of their story is not in how it started, but in how it continued. In the ordinary days and quiet nights. In the children raised and the meals shared. in the conversations on the porch and the hands held through aging, in the choice, made every single day to love each other well. That is what made theirs a love story for the ages. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the steady, patient, enduring choice to be there for each other, to wait for each other, to love each other through everything life brought their way. In the Wild West, where life was hard and death was common and hope was sometimes difficult to find, Thomas Whitaker and Delilah Nash created something that defied all of that. They created a haven of love and family and joy. They created proof that even the emptiest eyes could be filled with light again. They created a legacy that would outlast them by generations. And it all started with a simple promise from a cowboy to a grieving widow. I will wait however long for life to return. He waited. She returned. And together they lived. That is their story. That is their gift to the world. And that is why, more than a century after their deaths, people still talk about the Marshal and the widow who found each other in the Nevada desert and built a love that conquered death itself. Because some stories are too beautiful to forget, some loves are too powerful to fade, and some promises, once made and kept, echo through eternity. Thomas Whitaker kept his promise. Delilah Nash found her way back to life. And together, they proved that love, real love, patient love, could heal anything, could survive anything, could create anything. Their story ends where all good stories should, with a life well lived, a love well cherished, and a legacy that continues long after the final page is turned. They rest now side by side in the White Pine Cemetery, beneath the wide Nevada sky they both loved, together for eternity as they were in life. And somewhere in whatever comes after, a marshal is still holding a widow's hand, and she is smiling at him with eyes full of life and light, and they are both grateful for every single moment they had together. However long it took, however long it lasted, it was worth it. Every second, every heartbeat, every breath. That is the story of Thomas and Delilah Whitaker. That is the story of empty eyes and patient waiting and life returning. That is the story of love in the Wild West, where the harsh landscape and harder times could not stop two people from finding each other and holding on. It is a story that really happened. And it is a story that proves, beyond any doubt, that love is the most powerful force in the world, capable of healing the deepest wounds and lighting the darkest places. The end.